Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to The Art of the Book, a virtual tour of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America's Boston Virtual Book Fair. My name is Brad Johnson, and I'm the president of the ABAA. Before we welcome our panelists, I would like to personally invite all of you to spend some time today, the last day of the book fair, shopping and browsing the virtual booths. We have more than 175 exhibitors from all around the world and some pretty fantastic offerings, many of which are exclusive to this virtual book fair. You can visit the book fair until 7 p.m. Eastern Time at abaa.org/BBF. And again, the fair will remain open until 7 p.m. Eastern Time today. A few housekeeping issues. We are recording this session for later viewing. And if you have questions or comments, we encourage you to write them in the chat session. We're going to do our best to get to each and every one of them. So now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our panelists today. First, we have John Buchtel. He is the curator of rare books and head of special collections at the Boston Athenæum. Also pleased to welcome Sarah Hulsey, a book artist whose works draw on her background in linguistics to explore the structure of language in a visual domain. And last but not least, Phil Salmon, manager of Bromer Books, Boston's destination for beautifully printed books. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to John.
Thank you, Brad. So this will be a little different doing this virtually than it would be in person, where we would traipse you around the floor of the fair from booth to booth and look at things individually and turn the pages with you and ask the booksellers questions live. But we would only be able to do that with probably 8 or 10 of you at the most at a time. So it's sort of fun to have 56 and counting people out there in the audience. Just a brief commercial before we jump into the book fair. If we were actually doing this live in person in Boston, we would be doing tours at the Boston Athenæum too, right up on Beacon Hill. Wonderful historic membership library, one of the most beautiful libraries in America, and we would invite you to come and visit. And if you're based in Boston, or if your travels take you through Boston, please take time to check us out at 10.5 Beacon Street. We now have, in addition to opportunities to come in just as a short-term visitor, we do offer day passes as well. So and we also have a wonderful set of virtual programs. The next one of bookish interest will be on November 17th at noon with a talk on an N.C. Wyeth illustration. I hope you can come by to our virtual space, bostonathenaeum.org. So let's jump into the fair. I think we're going to start in the booth of Roy Young Bookseller. And Susan, you can go ahead and share that screen. There it is. Again, looking at book arts and artists' books. We're looking at examples of fine press printing and of artists who have created books. This is a classic, and it gives us a chance to look at a number of the different themes and threads that will follow through our presentation, our virtual tour today. So we're not going to attempt to define the artist's book. We're not going to attempt to give the history of the fine press movement, but if you're interested, there's lots of good literature on both topics. But we want to look at a few things with you and just think about what draws us to them, as for me as a curator, for Phil as a bookseller and purveyor of stories, as he puts it, and for Sarah as herself a book artist and part of the community of practitioners. This book is, as I say, a classic. It's a stunning work. Can we zoom in on that first page image, that first spread? It's a stunning piece of work. So this was printed in 1929 at the Kranach Press in Weimar in Germany. It's a collaborative piece with multiple people working to bring together what in some estimations is one of the finest pieces of fine press printing ever produced. It has adjectives like perfect have been applied to this book. The marriage of text and image, the work of the proprietor of the press, Count Harry Kessler, the amazing typography, which involved the work of Edward Johnson, one of the great 20th century type designers, the illustrations by Edward Gordon Craig, the theater designer. And it all comes together to produce a harmonious whole. That's one of the things that I'm especially on the lookout for when I'm exploring the fair and thinking about things that we might consider adding to the Boston Athenæum's collection. We're fortunate to have a copy of the English text edition of this book already, so I'm not sure we're going to need this German language edition. And for the Athenæum as a membership library, we're collecting these things to make them available to a wider audience. But part of the joy of getting to see something like this at the book fair is you could consider adding it to your own library, or you could consider joining the Athenæum so that you can see our copy. And actually research appointments in our reading room are free to any researcher anyway. But let's hear from Phil and Sarah about what strikes them about this book.
Well, from a bookseller standpoint, of course, there are books you sell, once, and there are books that you sell all the time. And the Chronic Hamlet is among a handful of books that you can sell all the time because it just has that appeal. It has that gravitas. Thinking about it this morning, and the way that Craig was able to pull so much gravitas out of those black figures, the range of drama that's contained there without a whole lot of detailed expression is just pretty resonant, and playing off of course the theatrical design of the text layout. It just, as John said, it just works as a whole, and is aesthetically very appealing, it's a lovely object. And,
a perfect marriage between text and image here. The weight of the blackness of each is perfect. The proportions of the page is perfect, and you can't tell this from your screen. This is part of what would be so much more fun if we were on the floor of the fair together. But it's a big book, and one thing we as book lovers love is actually feeling the book in your hands. This is a book that you actually want to interact with. Sarah?
I guess I look at this and think a lot about the collaboration involved, which you did mention, John, that you have this masterful book that's created through the really highly skilled effort of people in the whole variety of book related fields, from the images to the type design, to the typography, to the binding, and thinking about this as an example of a livre d'artiste book that really is a marriage of all of those different people working at the height of their craftspeople working at the height of their abilities.
Susan, let's take a look at the other images before we move along. Look at that sense of movement. Something Phil pointed out in an earlier conversation about this is just how Craig's work as a stage designer, as a set and costume designer, really translates into his imagery for the book. Really, really nice copy.
And if I remember my own description of this correctly, Eric Gill did the initials in this book, the title design
and the title.
Yeah. So
fantastic.
And Kessler, of course, was largely responsible for, launching Eric Gill's book career.
And the story of Kessler himself is great. That's another thing that, seeing each of these books, there are so many stories behind each one, and we barely have time to scratch the surface with them. Well, let's go. You can describe
the same book so many different ways. There's so much depth to some of these.
That's right, and different perspectives too. Let's go to something very different, but also a wonderful marriage of form and content. I won't say text and content, however. Let's go to Lux Mentis, bookseller based up in Maine, and let's look at 1753. And we're looking, let's go ahead and zoom in on that first image. We're looking at the label on the box that the book is in both letterpress text, so printed from metal type, but on this label, which is on a big cloth box. This is a big box, big cloth clamshell box, and text in English and Irish, so you already have some sense of where this thing might be coming from. Let's look at the next image. There's the box. This is going to be a substantive thing. That box is 8 inches thick. Let's open the box. What's inside? My goodness. This looks like a medieval bookbinding structure. And indeed, the structure is medieval. This is something you would have found on a 15th century manuscript. Look at those thick wooden boards, those huge cords. They haven't covered the binding in leather. And if I were looking at this simply as somebody who teaches the history of the book, I would say, boy, this would be a great teaching tool. You could show students the structure of books, how the pages are folded and gathered and sewn, and but that's not the point of this piece, at least not the primary point. Let's see what else we've got. Okay, there it is in its box. Close up of the folds, the gathered pages. And the sewing, you can almost see the sewing threads around the cords. What's next? So 1 page of text in this entire book. And I don't know if one of my colleagues would care to tell us what the idea here is.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I love this book. So Jamie Murphy made this book around 2018, and at that time, just before Christmas in 2018, in the Republic of Ireland, there were 1,753 homeless families. And so he made this book where there is 1 page for every family in this situation in Ireland, and they're all blank pages. So what I love about this book is it's really like a deeply conceptual book. I mean, it's all around an idea. It's around an idea of how can we convey something that is so, a number that's so large that it's hard to wrap your mind around, and thinking about what's involved in a family being homeless, and then the number of people that he's representing here. So it's a highly conceptual book, and yet it's a book that's highly crafted. I mean, beautifully bound. I think it was bound by Craig Jensen at Book Lab 2. So directed by Jamie Murphy, who's a book artist and letterpress printer in Ireland, and then working with a binder. But it's a book that is somehow both really conceptual, contains almost no text, and yet is still a book kind of at the highest level of craftsmanship. I think there might be 1 page of text, 1 more. I'm not sure if there's
one page that tells you what the idea is.
Yeah.
And then there's a colophon at the end that tells you who made it and how many copies. There are 8 copies of this.
And so you step back and look at the binding again, and you realize that unfinished nature of it is the rawness that's that's conveyed by the whole structure, and it makes an even more powerful statement that way. It's a powerful piece, and one that does not need words to convey that powerful message.
And it's also a wonderful example of a book that defies the idea of digitization. We sometimes talk with people who are kind of worried about the whole world of books going into virtual space, even as we're taking our book fairs into virtual space. This is a temporary thing. And books, physical books, have real staying power. This is a book that its meaning is in part embedded in its physicality and the heft of this thing. It's a heavy, big, tactile book, and it's a book. It's actually it's sort of just there's a thrill of pleasure, almost a jouissance in actually handling the book. There are a number of books that we're looking at today I have not seen. This is one I've actually handled before, and there's a real pleasure in holding it, and then you think about what the meaning is, and it really gets you. I love that.
And the fact that there is such the ability of book artists to respond to issues facing us, socially and as a species in general. It's been with us since time immemorial in terms of book creating, but it really has come to the fore, and you really get some creative and important glimpses at these issues that as they evolve, as they come to the fore.
So let's skip on over to Ken Sanders' booth and take a look at Giacomo Patri's White Collar. Speaking of wordless books, Phil, would you like to start us off with this?
Well, this of course is one of the more important, or one of the important exemplars of the wordless novel. The novel done in either lino cuts in this case, or wood cuts in the case of books by somebody like Lynn Ward or Franz Mazariel, that came pretty much of age in the 20s and 30s, and revolved very strongly around issues pertaining to social justice, labor, and colonialism, and other very pressing issues that are still with us to this day in many respects, and is also this is also the launching off point for the graphic novel. These are the roots of our of the modern graphic novel, and this particular book deals with labor and unionization, hence the title. And I believe there were 2 editions of this. This is the second edition, if I'm not mistaken.
There was a handmade edition, and then a
handmade edition that predated this, and then Rockwell Kent contributed the introduction to the second edition. Rockwell Kent also being no stranger to matters of social justice, and was in fact a socialist. I've always these things have always personally resonated with me. I was totally smitten with Lynn Ward's wordless novels. Right. When I started out in the trade quarter century ago.
Can we see some of the pages of the liner cuts while Phil's describing it?
And Sarah, I wonder if you have any response to this as a maker.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really astonishing how contemporary it feels. I mean, not that this was done in the 30s, I think, not that that was all that long ago, but it feels like the kind of thing. I mean, we were talking about how the Jamie Murphy book and many others are artists responding to social issues of the moment. And much of this still feels of the moment, which is both wonderful and a little bit disturbing that we're still thinking about so many of the same things. And I like the thought of this as a novel rather than just a series of illustrations. I mean, that something about having this in the book form causes you to think about the narrative behind it in a way that if you had these exact same pictures on the wall of a gallery, it would look like a collection of prints. Whereas here, something about the turning of the page and the format of the book itself suggests the words that aren't there. And I think that is one thing that the book can do in a really powerful way that's different from other ways of presenting art.
Also, fitting that we're, sorry, John.
Go ahead, Phil.
No, I was just saying, it's also, I was reminded that it's very fitting that we're talking about these books with that balance of text and pictures, but pictures on during Picture Book Month. I was reminded that November is Picture Book Month. So
fantastic. Well, speaking of text and picture, I love the fact that there are continuities throughout the history of books and texts, both visual texts and language-based texts. And something that occurred to me when we were looking at the medieval book structure to Jamie Murphy's blank book, essentially, that medieval structure suggests very, very subtly that there's a deep history to the struggles of the Irish people. And here, looking at this wordless novel, we might have our imaginations cast back to the picture windows in cathedrals in medieval Europe. Telling a story through pictures is nothing new, and yet here it is, new and fresh again, with a single artist bringing his vision to the page, and yet also in both of these books, highly limited editions. There's at one level, there's a sort of irony that communicating this vision does depend on copies of the book getting out.
And what's surprising too is in the case of this, which was first produced in a handmade edition, then produced in this edition, and all of the woodcut novels of Lynn Ward and others went into multiple printings early on after they were released. So they sold well at the time. So they resonated.
Well, and the form is very democratic. I mean, actually, I can't see the binding exactly, but it seems to be like a novel that you would buy in an ordinary bookshop. And so it's a democratic subject and the form of the book. And if it was printed in multiple editions, it does have this feel of something that should be disseminated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of text and image, let's pop into Ursus Books and have a look at another artist's collaboration. And maybe Sarah, you could start us off on this one.
Yeah, so this Man Ray book with poetry by Paul Eluard, it's the text is love poems about Eluard's wife. I don't know how to pronounce her name exactly, but it's Noosh or Nooch. So she was a famous muse of the Surrealists. She was once married to Dali, and she's the model of the photograms. So the images are made, they're called rayographs. Man Ray called them after himself, rayographs, but they're photograms. So they're images where an object is placed over photosensitive paper and then light is exposed. So in this case, they're photograms of the body and then reproduced as photogravure. So they're these really transparent, gorgeous, abstract, sort of surrealist images that Man Ray is known for, and yet they're married in this case with the poetry in a way that's really, really integrated. So on some of the pages where you see, where you see the text and the body together. They fit together in this way that there's not really an area for the image and an area for the text, but it's all integrated into one sort of liquid flowing form, which relates to the subject matter of the love poetry.
Here again, you see just the layout of the page kind of adding to the understanding of the text, and it's sculptural.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it talks about the idea of photography and artist books. A lot of what is talked about is woodcuts or lithographs or etchings, but photography, especially in this period, was really an important form. Is a period before photographic artist books and other artist books became somewhat separated, which is a little bit of an arbitrary division, I think. But here in this period in the 30s, they were really experimental in the same way. The book form, the form of the poetry, and also the way that photographers like Man Ray or Moholy-Nagy and other surrealists and Dadaists used photography in a really experimental, playful way.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And I think we should point out there is also a copy on offer from Le Feu Follet. So the one of the joys of the book fair, whether virtual or not, is sometimes you can actually physically or virtually compare multiple copies of the same fabulous book. Now let's look at another book that uses photographic process as part of its illustrative effort, but a much newer book. So the Man Ray and Paul Lawar book is decades old now. Here's a book that was actually made this year. We're going to pop on over to Bromer Booksellers, and Phil, this is your shop. So we're in your booth.
Here I am. You're in my booth. Yes. Unlike a real fair, I mean, I would be in my booth now. I wouldn't be able to lead this tour because I'd be working. But here I am leading a tour it is nice that this place is in. This is very recent. In fact, it's made. We received it about 3 weeks ago. This is Robin Price's unique book, Say Her Name, which is an extract from a poem by Józef Komuniaka, Pulitzer Prize winning African-American poet. And this incorporates his portions of this text, extracts from the poem with cyanotypes, which is again a photographic process using photosensitive paper exposed to sunlight to create this very striking blue these blue pages, and the paper itself was also partially dyed with walnut, and that's why you're getting the brown tints on the extremities. And these objects that are put within the cyanotypes are objects from nature. We are currently hosting a solo show by Robin Price of new graphic work by her called Spirit Compass, and a lot of her work is cyanotype, and then she imposes actually her own body in some of these images as well, which goes back to the Man Ray book. And this is obviously a very personal book. Robin is working through a great many things, coming back to the creative process after suffering some very real physical trauma, and so this has been it's been a very beautiful experience to help, to usher her into that, the space, and to see this work as it has evolved. I pulled a quote from the poem. I don't think it's in the book, that sort of places this idea of how an artist arrives at a structure and at a text and combines those things into, as John put it, it's the intersection of high, how did you say it, high art and
high concept and high craft.
High concept, high craft. The poem, part of the poem reads, "To feel a truth depends on how and why the singer's song fits into the mouth." And I just feel like that really embodies this work, and a lot of the things we deal with and make decisions about bringing into our gallery, and when we are curating these things for the people we to whom we sell books. And
I love the directness. Oh, sorry, Jen.
No, please, Sarah.
I love the directness of the way that she works with the paper. I mean, the fact that it's a unique book, the fact that the cyanotypes, it's another process similar to a photogram where the thing itself is what's making the image. There's no distance and no enlargement or subtraction. I mean, it's really just the object itself is represented there, and there's something so personal and vulnerable about that, even when it's just a leaf, but certainly when it's her body and the way it all gets integrated into this incredibly beautiful form with these materials. I mean, this is a book I'd like to touch and see in person, because it seems that it has this real richness of and tactility to the pages.
very much so, yes.
I can hardly wait to see it, and I plan on seeing it.
We can arrange that.
Yeah. That's one of the fortunate parts about being right here in Boston. Sarah, tell the audience what goes through the artist's mind in thinking about making a unique book versus making something in an edition.
I mean, I think it varies for the artist. Robin is someone I know who usually makes work in editions, or at least has made many works in very large for a handmade project. And to me, I've heard her talk about this. There was a reception at Bromer Books virtual a couple of days ago, and when Robin talked about that, I thought that the reason this was a unique book felt like it had to be, and it goes back to the idea of it being really personal and intimate, and really very much about interacting with these words and interacting in a almost spiritual and healing way is part of the way she talked about it. I mean, it's a tricky thing to make a unique book, because you spend however many months making it, and then you've created just one object. But there's something powerful about that too, and giving up the possibility of selling a large edition in service of conveying this idea that the kind of uniqueness is part of the content. At least that's how I feel about this book. I think there's other reasons to make a unique book.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the dealer's description points out that Robin's artwork interprets the poem as a deep, fluid connection between the self and an ancient motherhood by means of the way that the white lines of the poem appear on the cyanotypes. And I love the choice of materials too. The use of something so unusual as walnut dye, which I think actually even the choice, the selection of material contributes to the meaning as well as to the experience of the book. So from something deeply personal and meaningful, let's shift to something that's just playful. This is a piece in the booth of the Veitch's Art of the Book, and this is a piece by David Esselmont, a wonderful British book artist, his edition of Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky. And this is also a practically new book. This was produced this year as well. So David has such a delightful way of just bringing whimsy to his work, and it's such a pleasure to see this. I haven't gotten to see a copy of this in person yet, and I'm looking forward to it. But the images are reduction linocuts, meaning that you start with, well, maybe Sarah, can you tell us about reduction linocuts?
Sure, yeah, it's kind of a high stakes way to do release making. So it can be a linocut or a woodcut. It doesn't really matter what the material is, but you start. So typically when you have multiple colors in print, you make multiple blocks. So you would have, the green be one block and the yellow be another block and the black be a third block. A reduction block, you have one block. And you start off with anything you want to be white, you carve that out of the block and you print it, often in a light color like yellow. And then you carve more and you print it registered in the same spot with, I don't know what's next here, but so the green. And then you carve away more and then you print the black. And you can certainly have more than 3 colors, but that's the general idea. So the colors build up on top of the colors that were already there. And then you're left with only, you can't reprint that. That's the high stakes part of it. Normally you could go back and reprint another edition with your 5 wood blocks. But in this case, at the end, in service of creating the image, you've destroyed the earlier stages of the block.
David has made 40 copies of this, and that's it.
That's it.
And in this case, the text is even an image. These are, and he's played with words and language. We were fortunate enough to have him as an exhibitor last year. We had his large Keats panel, his painting with the calligraphy, his original calligraphy for this, for John Keats to Autumn, and he, and in this case, he's made. I believe these are linocuts of the text in reverse. So the text itself becomes part of the image in the book.
And plays off of what actually happens when Alice first encounters this. It is in mirror writing for her too. I suppose the deluxe edition ought to have a mirror in the box, right?
Well, I believe there was something included in the box, if I'm not mistaken.
Could be.
March feels so long ago. This came out in March, around March of this year. So Shannon reminds me there was a mirror in the box. Thank you, Shannon. I thought I remembered a mirror, but it was actually kind of a piece of shiny mylar, if I remember correctly.
And something that this makes me think of that can be different for artists' books than from sort of your typical paperback that you're just buying to read. Artist books have a way of allowing one to foster community, whether that's a book that you own at home that you pull off the shelf and you share with your visitors at a dinner party. Look at this really fun Jabberwocky, or this really meaningful personal poem that I've just added to my collection. And the same thing works for us in a situation like the Athenæum, where we're essentially forming a shared collection for a community of book lovers, that we have opportunities to bring these books out for classes and tours, and to show them in ways that aren't just under glass, because these are books that demand to be interacted with, to be appreciated fully. In a book like this, you want to turn the pages. You don't want to just see one spread of the book. So there's a delightfulness to this kind of book that lets you think about books as opportunities for shared experience, not just for individual isolated encounters. So I think we're getting close to time, so we ought to pick up the pace just a smidge. We
could talk all day.
A few more we'd like to run through real quick. Sarah, how about Anne Cavell's The Record at the Kelmscott Bookshop?
Oh, yeah. We could see that image.
There we go.
So this is another example of an artist taking something that's very, very contemporary and recording it. I mean, actually, that's what this book is about. So this is a book where the artist has taken text from different federal agencies that was changed under the Trump administration. So as soon as the Trump administration entered power, they started changing various properties of different federal agencies' missions. And so Anne Cavell recorded what was there before and then what was lost. So it's a book about trying to memorialize something that doesn't exist anymore and yet is such a part of our history. I actually haven't seen this book, so I'm not entirely clear on exactly what's happening, but it appears that those tabbed folder-like panels fold down and give you a new image. Yeah, have you seen this?
No, but the description tells us that, and it's pretty cool just thinking about the book as an interactive object, and it's also really amazing thinking about the book as we like to think of information as being something permanent, and this reminds us that sometimes information does not have staying power unless someone is very self-conscious about it, and now more than ever with the World Wide Web.
Right, it's the perfect counterpoint to the balance, the tipping point between the printed word and the digital word, and the thought that you could go in and change something, it would be gone.
Yeah, I mean, look at this description. Keyword. So this is policies that were changed with the new administration. Keyword searches for terms such as climate change, LGBT, and civil rights returned 4014 errors. Even more conspicuously, the Spanish language version and the disabled accessible version of the site were no longer available. I mean,
giving us a taste of what was to come.
Yeah, yeah.
And we can get that as a sound bite, or we can get that from this interactive object. And part of what I love about artists' books, they demand, as I say, interaction. They slow you down. They get you to think. And you may not agree with the political viewpoint of the artist, but the process of working through it is, I think, salutary and brings the possibility for empathy, ultimately. So that is at the fairly low end of the price point for these things. Some things are thousands of dollars, some things are mere hundreds. There are things for just about every budget. This next book, we have two more, and I think we'll turn it over to questions then. This next book is at Derringer Books, and also at a low price point. Dieter Roth's Gesammelte Werke, Band 7, $750. Pocket change, well, maybe. Tell us about this book.
So this book, if I could actually share the screen. Unfortunately, there are not images of the interior in that booth, but this is a really wonderful book. I saw it at MoMA. There was a retrospective of Diderot's books a few years ago. So this is a book. I'm interested, among other things, in thinking about a book as something that is, an artist book is something that's conceived by an artist. So not only books that are illustrated by artists or where an artist is one participant, but where the artist conceives of the entire project. And so this is a great example of that. There, if I could just say one other thing, there was an exhibition poster for a Diderot show around the same time where he had the image screen printed and then die cut circles were removed from the poster, and that was wheat pasted like other exhibition posters. But it meant that every single place that that poster was positioned was a different image because you saw beneath it whatever the posters were there before. And so this book does the same thing. So it's an assemblage of comic book pages, there are coloring book pages, and then there's these die cut circles. So it's this really wonderful combination of the artist conceives of the whole project, but there's this accidental character. I mean, he didn't even pay attention to whether the pages would be upside down or not. And so what happens is that as the reader turns the page in each spread that you see, it creates these other layers, and it kind of treats the book object as something three-dimensional where you can see multiple planes at the same time. So this is a conceptual book that uses the materiality of the pages and the way that they interact with each other to create, where the reader themselves really creates the book in the process of turning the pages.
This goes back to John's earlier statement about that books asked to be interacted with, and this is perfect, indication of a perfect example of that, and really something that you can discover something by looking at it. It evolves in your hand, and it also is, when you see it on the shelf and the picture that you see in the fair, it kind of belies what's inside.
And so if you were visiting the fair or visiting the virtual fair and you saw this book, take a moment to actually ask the bookseller, what's the story of this book? Why
tell you.
Interested in this? They'll tell you.
They'll tell you. And I think that this is the tactile part, and this is the part that's very important about book fairs in general, is, and the serendipity, discovering something that you didn't know you wanted. That's the principal mechanism, really.
Absolutely. So I realize I may have omitted a book from the list. Should we go to the Jim Dine piece, or did you still want to talk about anything else? Well, let's wrap up in Jeff Hirsch's booth.
We'll look at it because it is an exemplar of of that confluence between the fine printed book, the private press book, and the artist book. And this is of course one of the big Arian Press publications. This is Andrew Hoyam,
one of the great fine presses.
One of the great fine presses. Andrew Hoyam, who was a who studied under the Grabhorns, another legendary name in California fine printing. And Andrew balances in his complete oeuvre the typographic book and the illustrated book. So again, words and images. And he worked quite a bit with Jim Dine. This is one of, I think, 4 books he did with Jim Dine.
And their first collaboration.
This was their first collaboration, and fairly early in the work of the Arian Press, 82. So this follows, their other big book, the Moby Dick, by about 2 years. And it's a small edition, well, small for, an Arian book. Arian typically does editions of 300. And this is his take on the apocalypse, using woodcuts and, very very striking binding too, which is another thing we didn't really get to talk about, is how the cover of the book, and we sort of saw that earlier in the Murphy piece. But this is bound in wooden boards with the lightning bolts carved into I believe it's oak and a pigskin spine. So it's using materials that were also used in the medieval book to create something that's very modern feeling.
And the design of the binding is also part of the collaboration between the artist and the press.
And many artists have dealt with the subject of the apocalypse. So now we've got that from Dürer to Dine. You could make a whole study of that.
Well, and that's another part of the community that John was talking about. I was thinking about this with the Jabberwocky, but this is even more so here, that in seeing a book like this, you're not just connected to other people who have this particular book, but to all of the editions of the book that have been created in the past. It's like a collaboration with our artistic ancestors.
Absolutely. What a wonderful note to end on. And I think we can turn it over to questions. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Questions.
I just sent you the questions from the chat that have come through.
Great. So one of the questions is, are Wilson's notes included in the Hamlet?
They included in the German edition? I don't believe so.
I'm not sure they're in the German edition. The German edition was what, 1929, and then the English version was 1930, and they are in the English.
Wilson's notes are in the English edition. I know that because it's included in a little pocket in the back cover.
But a scholarly edition of Hamlet as a fine press book.
And did the artist design the book, or did she leave that to Daniel?
This must be about Robin Price's book. I actually am not sure. I believe that they collaborated on that, though. They work together fairly closely. I do believe Daniel Kelm does all of Robin's bindings.
And does beautiful work.
And those were the only two questions so far. Does anybody else have a question or two for the panelists?
Johnny Carrera's Webster's.
Yes.
A book that came from Massachusetts. It was back when he was in, I think he was in Waltham. I haven't seen that in a while. Commerce.
I actually worked with him on that just a very little bit. A lot of worked with Johnny over the 10 years he was making that book, but I interned with him just at the tail end of that project. It's an amazing book, but I don't know if any copies are still available.
Any other questions?
What would you say to an aspiring book artist looking to present their material to collectors? I think that's for you two.
I can say from the book artist side, but I mean, I'd actually be curious to hear what Phil says as well. I mean, I think my experience has been book fairs are the best way to do that. And there's a lot of book fairs, all the way from things like Codex to local artist book fairs. And there's a lot of them popping up in many cities. We've got one in Boston, there's one in Philly, there's a big one in New York and LA. And I think if you can show things at a fair and start going regularly, people start to notice your work. Someone told me that the first time she went to Codex, someone told her, well, after you've come 3 times, then we'll know that you're sticking around and we'll start to buy your work. So that's not everyone's experience, but I think that showing regularly is a good way to start.
I would say so. And I mean, you're obviously getting into this because you're following your bliss. You are you've got something that inside you that needs to be expressed in book form, and you know, it's a matter of that happy confluence of aesthetic and impact of message. I mean, you know, in terms of being appealing, as somebody who is, you know, looking for material, you know, with a particular aesthetic in mind. But I would say that the advice to show wherever you can is good advice, and to you know, to visit booksellers and show your work to them. I mean, because they're booksellers are, you know, they're a way to get your book out to the market. And if somebody feels a connection with your work, then it's the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
They can be great advocates. Wonderful. Last opportunity for questions.
We have one from the Q&A. Did Jamie Murphy ever express any opinion about a homeless family making any kind of entry in the book on one of the pages? What would be the reaction to this? Is this more interaction?
If you buy the book, you can write in the book.
Okay, my take on it is that that's contrary to what the book is trying to do, that the blankness and is sort of about the silence that a government feels towards people who are homeless, that the people who are homeless are often not given any kind of a voice in society, and that the blankness is trying to convey that voicelessness. I think it's a different book if you make a book where there's, not that it's not a wonderful book, but a book with like actual contributions from the people about whom he's talking. I think, well, I don't mean to silence that hypothetical family, but I actually think would be less powerful to the overall message. Personally.
Right. And we haven't asked Mr. Murphy directly, but I think it, just simply by putting 8 copies of this book out into the world, you relinquish control over those 8 copies, and somebody may wind up doing a project exactly like this, or they may decide, you know, keep it pristine, allow the artist's vision for this book to be preserved intact.
We have in the Q&A someone stating that she holds an artist residency in Las Vegas. It's currently virtual, and she'd like to help budding book artists. How can she get the info to them? Is that something that Codex might be able to convey, or?
I would say the College Book Art Association, CBAA. If you email them, there's all kinds of contacts on their website. They will connect you with all of the, well, many of the professors around the country who are teaching book arts, and that'll be a way to get it out to students and also practitioners.
You could also maybe reach out to the Guild of Bookworkers as a, for the crafts, on the craftsman side.
Great suggestions. Okay. Last call for questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for your wonderful comments, and thank you for our attendees for asking wonderful questions. Thank you so much, and we hope you all visit the book fair at abaa.org/VBF.
Gotta get back to my booth now.
Yeah. Thank you all. Bye now.